to our aim is to dramatically reduce reoffending rates. We began in Bristol 5 years ago, Bristol Together, expanded to Birmingham and the West Midlands, and in January of this year, under the leadership of Barry Mocken, who's our Chief Executive, also launched Glasgow Together, with support from, amongst many others, the Robertson Trust. And I think Barry and the team here in Glasgow have done a wonderful job, and it's Nick and my pleasure to sort of give what small support we can, but it's a great project already employing ex-offenders in the city of Glasgow and in the surrounding area. We're still relatively new, but we've got a reasonable track record, I think now. Nearly 100 employees have been employed throughout the group, but just 2 have reoffended. And if you look at national reoffending rates, that's a dramatic reduction. We're not surprised because, of course, we have a full-time job. It's a sort of 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. There's support outside of work from mentors. There's a team environment. They're quite tired after a hard day's work on a building society. It's part of that structured work. And yesterday, Nick and I went to visit one of our sites in Glasgow, and I talked to an employee who had just come back from his summer holiday, and he was invigorated from that because actually a holiday now meant something. It was leisure as opposed to work, and the chance to actually have a holiday when it was a rest from work was great. His daughter had started primary school, and I saw somebody who we met first in February who had low self-esteem, feel quite insecure. Suddenly there was a man who was physically kind of stronger and healthier from work on a building site, but actually seeing an opportunity as a father, as a partner, and as a colleague. And it was just seeing the evidence of that transformation that was taking place on a building site just near here. But anyway, his talk about the finance mechanism which we've done this. We are a social business. We regard making a sustainable profit to reinvest back into the work as being equally important to the social impact we create. We've raised bonds from charitable trusts and high net worth philanthropists, totalling £6.6 million in Bristol, Birmingham and Glasgow. And so we pay a fixed rate of return to those investors, and that enables us to have cash to purchase empty property, to purchase land, to do property development, and then the properties are resold onwards, so the money's recycled, and we hope to churn that money over several times, so actually that the turnover will vastly exceed the amount of capital we have to continually finance the job creation programme. I estimate that in the past 5 years we've paid out about £800,000 to investors. In the case of charitable trusts like Robertson Trust, that will simply go back into their grant pots to further the work that they do. The reason we picked property development was actually because we think it's particularly suitable work for ex-offender workers. If you're targeting an industry where you want people to move on to other areas of work, actually building's ideal. There's a wide range of activities under one roof. Carpentry, joinery, plastering, painting and decorating, on the roof, down in the basement, a real range of skills. You can see the fruits of your labour immediately. It's a team environment, there's variety, there's physical work. And actually the construction industry, not being public facing, is probably a bit more pragmatic about employing ex-offenders with that track record. So we've had a real success, particularly in Bristol where we've been going for longer, of helping people move on to other areas of full-time work or beginning life as a self-employed contractor where there's a real variety of work. So we create the job in the first place, but only see the job as being complete when our employees move on to sustainable full-time work elsewhere in order that we can then create the next vacancy. And finally, on this introductory, we of course try and look at the wider support of our employees. You're very blessed here in Scotland, and I congratulate the Scottish Government for continuing to invest in social work, in care. Sadly in England, we've seen an almost dismantling of the probation service. So the kind of after prison care here in Scotland is to be admired. It's not in England, sadly. But we try and link up our employees elsewhere with mentors. looking at the kind of 9 to 5 after work, sorry, the 5 to 9 after work, in addition to the 9 to 5 on site. Our project managers who supervise all aspects of the work end up being kind of de facto father figures, if you'll allow me to say that, where shoulder to shoulder you can kind of discuss things and get things out of people that you wouldn't perhaps get in a more conventional face-to-face supervision meeting. And as I'm sure many of you will know better than me, that the wider aspects of rehabilitation, debts, payday loan debts, or inadequate housing, or challenges at home, the wider issues which we can start to address because they have a full-time job, a full-time income, and a real hope and future ahead of them. Just briefly, then I'll go on to the actual nuts and bolts of our model. Here's a house in Bristol we purchased actually from the council. It was long-term empty property, but we bought it from the council in Bristol and made a good profit. And you can see, hopefully, the quality of the work we do. And people often ask me, well, how can ex-offenders do a kitchen of that quality? And my answer tends to be, well, what you see in front of you is the result of several thousand individual tasks, none of which on their own that complicates it. But our project managers know the sequence of those several thousand tasks. So of course you need professionals to do kind of gas connections and maybe the more complicated structural work. But we're heartened to see how much of the work can be done by people. And when they complete work of that quality, of course it so boosts their self-esteem. It's wonderful. Here's a project in Birmingham. We bought an empty office block which has been lying empty for a while, and got planning permission to convert it to 23 studio apartments. That's the completed kind of kitchenette area. And we're hoping at the end of this month this will be leased on a long-term basis to a housing association in Birmingham who will house refugee individuals in desperate need of accommodation, and sold on a long-term basis to a secondary property fund. That's the team that did the work there in Birmingham. A project in Worcester, forgive my poor camera angles, but that's the sort of stripped back view we had of an empty basement, and then slightly wrong angle, but that's the completed studio apartment we completed at the end. So again, we think very high quality work. Here's a new build extension on the side of a house, also in Worcester. You can see the employees working on that, and there's the interior once completed. So again, I'm sure Barry would gladly show any of you around our current projects in Glasgow and the surrounding area. So just to conclude, Kenneth asked me to sort of look at the pros and cons of our model. The advantage we've got is it's quite a simple model to understand, probably first and foremost. We raise money, we have it for a period of time, we pay a fixed term, fixed interest investment, so actually our investors get a return immediately rather than waiting for a hopeful payday at the end of it. And certainly there's a few setup costs prior to launching, but the aim is to be as if not entirely grant-free, then certainly not reliant on grants. Most of our income, of course, comes from the sale of property. So Dame Barbara spoke about the environment of cuts. We can largely navigate our way through that by not being reliant on grants. We're not reliant on payment by results, where we have to sort of demonstrate a social return in order to get paid to then repay our investors. What we've actually got is we've decoupled the return mechanism. Of course, our investors invest and they want to create jobs for ex-offenders and reduce reoffending. But the means by which we pay their financial return is through making money from property. So we decouple the social impact from the financial return. It's asset-backed, and as my colleague Nick, the chair of the Together Group, mentioned, we've been able to have some modest tax relief to encourage individuals, many of whom are generous givers to charity, to also think about investing in charitable purpose as well. And whilst we're a small project, just 3 projects in Bristol, Birmingham and Glasgow, we've got clear plans to expand and set up elsewhere. And there's potentially then economies of scale where the Together Group can look at perhaps a kind of wider group fundraise, reducing transaction costs. some treasury management where we can perhaps sort of allocate capital more efficiently across our projects and perhaps better capture the impact we make to improve our social impact reporting. So some very clear advantages, but to anticipate the Dragon's Den objections, perhaps a final slide on some disadvantages. It's a simple model, but of course, we've raised £6.6 million already. We aim to probably at least double that in the next few years. There's a finite amount of capital, of course, from charitable trusts. We can't keep going back to Robertson Trust and asking for more and more. That would be wrong. Actually, in Bristol, we've had some wonderful support from the Esme Fairbairn Foundation. But at the end of the 5 years, where of course they've had interest throughout that 5 years, they say, well, we regard you as a success. We'd like our money back to seed the next project, which is fine, understandable, because we then have to go and replace it. So, the charitable trusts like to do new things, the innovation, as Dame Barbara mentioned, but we need long-term patient capital. Perhaps our fixed interest bond is not very appropriate. It's also quite inflexible capital. If any of you have ever done property development, you'll realise that the timing of a sale of a house or if it falls through for any reason, you can have a delay. So often we have a bit of a feast or famine approach where we may have the money either sitting in our bank earning nothing and not generating a return for our investors, or potentially tied up in property and then delaying the next project. So actually aligning our workflow for our employees who have to have continual work. This is not 0 hours contracts, this is full-time employment. We guarantee them the job when they start and we'll give them work come what may. How can we align our workflow with our cash flow? Very difficult. And of course, property is asset-backed. You've got the security of bricks and mortar, but inevitably it's inherently risky and probably more importantly cyclical. We've gone in Bristol when we started in 2011, still pretty much in the teeth of the recession. Banks weren't lending. It was a great time to buy empty properties, which were unmortgageable, so we could kind of become as a cash buyer, buy them, do them up, and then make them right move ready and sell them on via the estate agents. Then we had a very good period of time where we really sort of surfing the wave of house price inflation and buying properties and actually making money simply on the fact they were going up so much in Bristol. But now the market's certainly peaked, if not in a bit of decline. Thinking, well, how can we joint venture? How can we talk to councils and churches who may have empty land, redundant property, that we can partner with them, share risk and share reward? And perhaps in a downturn, which will happen at some point inevitably, can we look more at contracting, so we're risking less capital and perhaps doing maintenance work and contract work before the cycle then turns again and you start then picking up cheaper assets. So we don't wish to be developers, we have to be because that's our business. We want to create work for ex-offenders, but you have to sort of understand the cycle of the market. And my final point, and actually the Minister touched on this briefly in his answer to the second question, kind of cui bono, who really benefits from this? We get our capital from Robertson Trust, Esme Fairbairn, some generous individuals, and of course they themselves don't benefit from a reduction in reoffending. Maybe on the tangent through safer communities, but actually we make a dramatic reduction to the state. We've estimated that in Bristol, this is direct savings from reduced reoffending, reduced incarceration costs, reduced benefits, small amounts of tax revenue. Of course, employees on living wage pay a small amount of tax, still pay a bit of tax. So the amount that we directly save the state will be close to the entire amount of capital we raised in the first place. And we don't get a penny from the government for that. And certainly in England, the sort of inflexibility of the work programme and transferring rehabilitation, we haven't quite managed to tap into that. That could be simply I'm bad at that. Maybe other better minds could do better on that. But it's how we can sort of say to Scottish Government, UK Government, even councils or NHS or the Justice Department, we're saving you money, we can prove it. Could you perhaps share in the risk of that so we can then perhaps pay a higher return to investors, or we can actually reinvest more of our surpluses into mentoring, into support for employees, bursaries to become self-employed, zero interest loans to take out deposits on first flats. We'd like to do far more, but actually, without that kind of share in the savings we create, I fear there'll be a ceiling on the amount we can grow. And so, what we're looking at now is how we can move on from our sort of fixed interest charity bonds to a more blended range of finance, a bit of grant possibly, some quasi-equity, long-term patient capital, and then maybe looking at bank lending where we can kind of draw down money as and when required, rather than having the interest in our bank from day one and needing to pay out throughout the year. So I'd be very keen to get your feedback, both positive and critical, on how we can improve. But once again, thank you to Robertson Trust for their support for Glasgow Together, and keen to keep the discussion going. Thank you very much.